Chapter 14. Late in the afternoon, Jair and his companions reached the dwarf community of Culhaven. It was a journey just as well over and done with, in the bellman's opinion. Leaden skies and a chill wind had followed them east through the Silver River country, and even the changing colours of the great eastland forests had a grey and wintry cast to them. Geese flew southward over the land through threatening autumn skies, and the flow of the river, whose course they followed, was rough and unfriendly. The Silver River had begun to show signs of the poisoning foretold by its king. Blackish scum laced its waters, and its clear silver colour had turned murky. Dying fish, small rodents, and fallen birds floated past, and the river was choked with deadwood and shrub. Even its smell was bad, the fresh cleanness become a rank and fetid odour that assailed their nostrils with each change in the wind. Ye remembered his father's tales of the Silver River, tales told since the time of Jair, and what he saw now made him sick at heart. Garrett Yaks and Slanter did little to improve his mood, even without the constant reminder of the river's ill and the harsh cast of the day. Jair would have found it difficult to keep a smile on his face, or cheerfulness in his voice, with the weapons master and the gnome for travelling companions. Withdrawn and taciturn, they trudged beside him with all of the enthusiasm of mourners at a death watch. Not a dozen words had been exchanged since the march had resumed early that morning. Not a smile had crossed either face. Eyes riveted on the path ahead, they went forward with a single-minded determination that bordered on fanaticism. Once or twice Jair had ventured to speak, and the responses each time had been little more than a muted grunt. The noontime meal had been a strained and awkward ritual of necessity, and even the silent march east had been preferable to that. Thus their approach into Culhaven was more than a little welcome to the bellman, if for no other reason than that it meant he would soon have a chance to talk to someone civil for a change. Although there was some reason to doubt even that. Dwarves had sighted them as far west as the border of the Shannara, silent watchers who had made no effort to make them feel welcome. All along the trail leading in, there had been patrols of dwarf hunters, hardened men wrapped in leather waistcoats and forest cloaks, armed and purposeful in their walk. None of these had given greeting, or paused for even the briefest chat. All had passed and gone their way without inquiry. Only their eyes had strayed over to view these visitors, and their eyes had not been friendly. By the time Jair and his fellow travellers reached the edge of the dwarf village, they were being studied openly by every dwarf they passed, and there was more than a hint of suspicion in those looks. Still in the lead, Garrett Yaks seemed oblivious to the eyes that followed after them. But Slanter was growing increasingly edgy, and Jair was almost as uncomfortable as the gnome. Garrett Yaks led along the roadway that crisscrossed the village, clearly familiar with the community and certain of what he was about. Neatly kept homes and shops lined the pathways they walked, sturdily built structures fronted by immaculate lawns and hedgerows, and brightened by lines of flower banks and carefully tended gardens. Families and shop owners looked up as they passed, hands gripping tools and wares as they paused in their day's work. But there were armed men even here, dwarf hunters with hard eyes and belted weapons. This might be a community of families and homes, Jair thought to himself, but just at that moment it has more the look of an armed camp. Finally, as they entered the central part of the village, they were brought to a halt by a foot patrol. Garrett Yak spoke briefly with one of the sentries, and the dwarf disappeared on the run. The weapons master stepped back with Jair and Slanter. Together they faced the remaining members of the patrol in studied silence and waited. Dwarf children came to stand about them, curiously, eyes fixed on Slanter. The gnome ignored them for a time. Then, tired of the game, and gave a sudden growl that sent the entire bunch scurrying for cover. The gnome glowered after them, glanced irritably at Jair, and withdrew into a determined funk. A few minutes later, the sentry dispatched by Garrett Yaks returned. With him was a rugged-looking dwarf with a great curling black beard and moustache and a bald head. Without slowing, he went directly to the weapons master, his hand extended in welcome. "Took your sweet time getting here," he growled as the other clasped the calloused hand in his own. Sharp brown eyes peered out from beneath heavy brows, and the look of the man was hard and fierce. His stout, compact body was clothed in loose-fitting forest garb, belted and booted in soft leather, and he wore a brace of long knives at his waist. In one ear, a large gold earring dangled. "Elb Foraker," Garrett Yaks introduced the dwarf to Jair and Slanta. Foraker studied them wordlessly for a moment, then turned back to the weapons master. "Strange company you're keeping, Garrett." "Strange times," the other shrugged. "How about a place to sit and something to eat?" Foraker nodded. "This way." He led them past the patrol to where the roadway branched right, and from there into a building that housed a large eating hall, filled with benches and tables. A handful of tables were occupied by dwarf hunters, absorbed in their evening meal. A few glanced up and nodded to Foraker, but no one this time showed any particular interest in the dwarf's companions. Apparently it made a difference whom you were with, Jair thought. Foraker chose a table for them, well back against one wall, and signalled for food to be brought. "What am I supposed to do with these two?" the dwarf asked, when they had seated themselves. Garrett Yaks turned to his companions. "Direct sort of a fellow, isn't he? He was with me 10 years ago when I was training dwarf hunters for a border skirmish along the Wolfskag. He was with me again in Culhaven a few years back. That's why I'm here now. He asked me to come, and he doesn't take no for an answer." He looked back at Foraker. "The Veilman is Jair Omsford. He's looking for a sister and a druid." Foraker leaned back, frowning. "A druid? What druid? There aren't any druids anymore. Haven't been any druids since—" "I know, since Alanon," Jair interjected, unable to keep still any longer. "That's the druid I'm looking for." Foraker stared at him. "That right? What makes you think you'll find him here?" "He told me that he was going into the Eastland. He took my sister with him." "Your sister?" The dwarf's brow was fiercely knit. "Alanon and your sister, and they're supposed to be here somewhere?" Jair nodded slowly, a sinking feeling in his stomach. Foraker looked at him as if he were crazy. Then he looked at Garrett Yaks. "Where did you find this Veilman?" "On the way," the other replied vaguely. "What do you know about the druid?" Foraker shrugged. "I know that no one has seen Alanon in the Eastland for more than 20 years, with or without anybody's sister." "Meh. Well, you don't know much then," Slanta spoke up suddenly, the faintest hint of sneer in his voice. "The druid's come and gone right under your nose." Foraker's fierce countenance swung around on the speaker. "I'd watch my mouth if I were you, gnome." "This one supposedly tracked the druid out of the Eastland," Garrett Yaks offered, grey eyes wandering off casually about the empty hall. "Tracked him from the Melmore right to the Veilman's doorstep." Foraker stared at him. "I'll ask again, what exactly am I supposed to do with these two?" Garrett Yaks looked back at him. "I've been thinking about that. Does the council meet tonight?" "Every night these days." "Then let the Veilman speak to them." Foraker frowned. "Why should I do that?" "Because he has something to tell them. And I think you're going to want to hear. And not just about the druid." Dwarf and weapons master eyed each other in silence. "I'll have to make a request," Ulrika said at last, his lack of enthusiasm evident. Now seems like a good time to do it. Garrett Yax rose to his feet. Ulrika sighed and stood up with him, glancing down at Jair and Slanter as he did so. You two can eat your meal and stay put. Don't try wandering off. He hesitated. I don't know anything about a druid passing through, but I'll look into it for you. Omspit. He shook his head. Come along, Garrett. The dwarf and the weapons master left the eating hall. Jair and Slanter sat alone at the table, lost in thought. Where was Alanon? Jair asked himself in silent desperation, head lowered to study his hands as he clasped them before him. The druid had said he was going into the Eastland. Wouldn't he come through Culhaven if he hadn't? Then where had he gone? Where had he taken Bryn? A dwarf in a white bib apron brought them plates of hot food and cups of ale, and they began to eat. No one said anything. The minutes slipped past as they consumed the meal, and Jair felt his hopes fading with each bite he took, as if somehow he were consuming the answers his questions demanded. Pushing the plate back from where he sat, he scuffed one boot against the plank flooring nervously and tried to decide what he would do if Ulrika were right and Alanon and Bryn had indeed not come this way. Stop that! Slanter growled suddenly. Jair glanced up. Stop what? Stop rubbing your boot against the floor. It's annoying. Oh, sorry. And quit looking like you lost your best friend. Your sister will turn up. Jair shook his head slowly, still distracted. Maybe. The gnome muttered. I'm the one who should be worrying, not you. I don't know how I ever let you talk me into this fool's errand. Jair propped his elbows on the table and cupped his chin in his hands. There was determination in his voice. Even if Bryn didn't come through Culhaven, even if Alanon went another way, we've still got to go into the Anar, Slanter, and we've got to persuade the dwarves to help us. Slanter stared at him. We? Us? You'd better take a moment and rethink that we and us nonsense. I'm not going anywhere but back to where I came from, before I got involved in this whole mess. You're a tracker, Slanter, Jair said quietly. I need you. Too bad, the gnome snapped, his rough yellow face suddenly dark. I'm also a gnome, in case you hadn't noticed. Did you see the way they looked at me out there? Did you see those children looking at me like I was some sort of wild animal brought in from the forest? Use your head. There's a war going on between gnomes and dwarves, and the dwarves aren't likely to listen to anything you have to say, so long as you persist in making me your ally, which I'm not in any case. Jair bent forward. Slanter, I have to reach Heaven's Well before Bryn reaches the Malmwood. How am I going to do that without someone to guide me in? You'll find a way. Knowing you. The gnome brushed the matter aside. Besides, I can't go back there anymore. Spill could have told them what I did. Or if not him, then the other gnome that ran off. They'll be looking for me. If I go back, someone will recognize me. When I'm caught, the walkers... He stopped abruptly and threw up his hands. I'm not going, and that's it. He went back to eating his poo, his head lowered to his plate. Jair regarded him silently, wondering if perhaps he were making a mistake in seeking Slanter's help in the first place. Perhaps this king of the Silver River hadn't intended him as an ally, after all. Slanter didn't really seem like much of an ally when you thought about it. He was altogether too clever, too opportunistic, and his loyalty changed as often as the wind. He wasn't one to be depended on, was he? Yet despite all that, there was still something about the gnome that Jair liked. Maybe it was his toughness. Like Garrett Yak, Slanter was a survivor, and that was the sort of companion Jair needed if he were to reach the deep Anar. He watched as the gnome drank down the last of the ale in noisy gulps and then said quietly, I thought you wanted to learn about the magic. Slanter shook his head. Not anymore. I've learned all I care to know about you, boy. Jair frowned in annoyance. I think you're just scared. Think what you like. I'm not going. What about your people? Don't you care what the Maud Wraiths are doing to them? Slanter's eyes snapped up. I don't have a people anymore, thanks to you. Then he shrugged. Doesn't matter, though. I haven't really had a people since I left the Eastland. I'm my own people. That's not true. The gnomes are your people. You went back to help them, didn't you? Times change. I went back because it was the smart thing to do. Now I'm not going back because that's the smart thing to do. Atlanta was growing angry. Why don't you just give it up, boy? I've done enough for you already. I don't feel obliged to do anything further. After all, the king of the Silver River didn't give me any silver dust to help clean up his river. That's fortunate, isn't it? Jair flushed, a bit angry now himself. A fat lot of good you'd be, changing sides every 5 minutes. When things got a little rough, I thought you helped me back in the oak because you made a choice. I thought you cared what happened to me. Well, maybe I was wrong. What do you care about, Slanter? The gnome was nonplussed. I care about staying alive. That's what you'd care about too, if you had any brains. Jair went rigid with indignation. He came halfway out of the seat, arms braced on the table. Staying alive? Well, just exactly how are you going to do that when the Maud Wraiths poison the Eastland and then move west into the other lands? That's what's going to happen, isn't it? That's what you said. Where will you run then? Plan on changing sides one more time? Become a gnome again, long enough to fool the walkers? Slanter reached up and shoved Jair back. You have a big mouth for someone who understands so little about life. Maybe if you'd been out in the world looking after yourself instead of having someone do it for you, you'd not be so quick to point the finger at others. Now shut up. Jair lapsed into immediate silence. There was nothing to be gained by pushing the matter any further. Slanter had made up his mind not to help, so that was the end of it. He was probably better off without the gnome anyway. The two were still glowering at each other when Garrett Yax returned a few moments later. He was alone, and he came directly to where they sat. If he noticed the tension between them, he gave no indication of it. He took a seat next to Jair. You're to go before the Council of Elders, he said quietly. Jair shook his head slowly. I don't know about this. I don't know if this is the right thing to do. The weapon master pinned him with his eyes. You don't have a choice. What about Bryn and Helenon? There is no news of them for Raker checked, and they haven't been to Culhaven. No one knows anything about them. The grey eyes studied the Velman intently. Whatever help you're to find in this quest of yours, you'll have to find it on your own. Jair glanced back quickly at Slanter, but the gnome refused to meet his gaze. He turned back to Garrett Yax. When do I go before the council? The weapons master stood up. Now. The Dwarf Council of Elders had convened in the assembly of a large and cavernous hall settled within the bowels of a squarish building that housed all of the officers governing the affairs of the village of Culhaven. 12 strong, the members of the council sat behind a long table on the dais at the head of the chamber and looked down upon rows of benches separated by aisles that ran back to a pair of wide double doors leading in. It was through these doors that Garrett Yax brought Jair and Slanter. Shadows cloaked all but the very forefront of the assembly, where oil lamps cast their harsh yellow light across the dais. The three who entered made their way to the edge of the light and stopped. A gathering of others occupied seats on the benches closest to the dais, and heads lifted and turned at their approach. A haze of pipe smoke hung over the men gathered, and the pungent smell of burning tobacco filled the air. Come forward, a voice called. They proceeded until they stood even with the foremost line of benches. Jair glanced around uneasily. The faces that stared back at him were not simply the faces of dwarves. A handful of elves sat immediately to his right, and half a dozen bordermen from Culhaven far to his left. Poor Raker was there as well, black-bearded, face dour and set as he leaned against the far wall. Welcome to Culhaven, the voice spoke again. The speaker rose from behind the table on the dais. He was a grey-bearded dwarf of some years, rough face and bluff, skin browned and lined in the harsh light of the lamp. He stood centremost among the elders at the council. My name is Browick, elder and citizen of Culhaven. First at this council, he informed them. His hand lifted and beckoned to Jair. Come forward, Valeman. Jair came toward him a step or two and stopped, glancing at the line of faces that looked down at him. All were aged and withered, yet with eyes still quick and alert as they had studied him. Your name? Browick asked him. Jair Omspud, he replied, of Shady Vale. The dwarf nodded. What would you say to us, Jair Omspud? Jair glanced about. The faces all about him waited expectantly. Faces he did not know. Should he reveal what he knew to them? He looked back at the elder. You may speak freely, Browick assured him, sensing his concern. All gathered here are to be trusted. All are leaders in the fight against the Mord race. He sat down again slowly and waited. Jair looked about once more, then took a deep breath and began to speak. Step by step he revealed all that had happened since the arrival of Alanon in Shady Vale those many nights past. He told of the Druid's coming, of his warning of the Mord race, of his need for Bryn, and of their departure east. He described his subsequent flight, the adventures that had befallen him in the Highlands and the Black Oak, his meeting with the King of the Silver River, and the prophecy foretold by the legendary king. It took him some time to tell it all. While he spoke, the men gathered about him stayed silent. He could not bring himself to look at them. He was frightened of what he might see in their faces. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the scams and hollows that moulded Browick's withered countenance, and the deep-set blue eyes that stared fixedly back at him. When at last he was finished, the dwarf elder leaned forward slowly, his rough hands folding on the table before him, his gaze still holding Jair's. 20 years ago I fought with Alanon to keep the demon hordes from the elven city of Babylon. It was a terrible battle. Young Edana Lessadel, he indicated with his hand, a blonde-haired elf barely older than Bryn, was not even born then. His grandfather, the great Eventine, was king of the elves. That was when Alanon last walked the Four Lands. Not since that time has the Druid been seen, Valeman. He has not come to Culhaven. He has not come to the Eastland. What say you to that? Jair shook his head. I don't know why he didn't come this way. I don't know where he has gone. I only know where it is that he goes, and my sister with him. And I know, too, that he has indeed been within the Eastland. He turned towards Slanter. This hunter tracked him from the Malmord west to my home. He waited for confirmation, but Slanter said nothing. No one has seen Alanon for 20 years, another elder of the council repeated quietly. No one has ever spoken with the king of the Silver River, a third said. I spoke with him, Jair said, and my father also spoke with him. He helped my father and an elf girl flee the demons to Avalon. Browick continued to study him. I know of your father, youngster. He did come to Avalon to aid the elves in their fight against the demons. It was rumoured that he was the possessor of Elfstone, just as you have said. But you say that you took the Elfstones from your home and then gave them up to the king of the Silver River? In exchange for magic I could use, Jair affirmed quickly. For a wish I could use to save Bryn, for a vision crystal to find her, and for strength for those who would help me. Browick glanced now at Garrett. The weapons master nodded. I have seen the crystal of which he speaks. It is magic. It did show to us the face of a girl. One, he says, is his sister. The elf identified as Edana Lessadel came suddenly to his feet. He was tall and fair-skinned, his blonde hair reaching to his shoulders. My father has spoken to me of Will Omspud many times. He has said that he is an honourable man. I do not think a son of his would speak anything but the truth. Unless he mistook fantasy for truth, one of the council suggested. This tale is difficult to swallow. But the waters of the river are indeed foul, another pointed out. We all know that in some way the Maud wraiths poison them in an effort to destroy us. As you say, common knowledge, replied the first, hardly proof of anything. Other voices rose now, arguing the merits of Jair's tale. Browick raised his hand sharply. Peace, elders. Give thought to what we are about. He turned back to Jair. Your quest, if it be true, requires that we give you aid. You cannot succeed without the aid. Valman, armies of Nome lie between you and the thing you seek. This place you call Heaven's Well. Understand, too, that none among us has ever been where you would go, or seen the source of the waters of the Silver River. He glanced about for confirmation. Heads nodded, and no one spoke in contradiction. For us to help you, then, we must first be certain of what we do. We must believe. How are we to believe a thing of which we have no personal knowledge? How are we to know what you tell us is the truth? I would not lie, Jair insisted, flushing. Not knowingly, perhaps, the elder mused. Yet all lies are not intended. Sometimes what we believe to be truth is but a falsehood, which deceives us. Perhaps that is what has happened here. Perhaps if we waste enough time talking about it, it will be too late to do anything to help Bryn. Jair lost his temper completely. I have not been deceived in anything. What I spoke of happened. The voices murmured in dissatisfaction, but immediately Browick signalled for quiet. Show to us this pouch of silver dust, that we might gain some measure of belief in what you say, he ordered. The Valeman stared at him helplessly. It will not aid you. The dust appears as common sand. Sand? One of the council members shook his head in disgust. Why are we wasting our time, Browick? Let us at least see the crystal, then, Browick sighed. Or prove to us, in some other way, that what you say is true, another demanded. Jair felt his chance of convincing the dwarves of anything slipping rapidly away. Few, if any, of the council believed what he was telling them. They had seen nothing of Alanon or Bryn. None of them had ever heard of anyone speaking with the King of the Silver River. For all he knew, they didn't even believe that such a being existed. Now he was telling them he had given away elfstones for magic that they could not even see. We waste our time, Browick, the first elder muttered once more. Let the Valeman be questioned by others while we get on with our business, another said. Again the voices rose, and this time they drowned out Browick's pleas for silence. Almost to a man, the dwarves of the council and those gathered with him called for the matter to be disposed of without further delay. I could have told you this would happen, Slanter whispered suddenly from behind him. Jair went crimson with anger. He had come too far and endured too much to be shoved aside now. Give us proof, they were telling him. Make us believe. Well, he knew how to make them believe. Stepping forward suddenly, he lifted his hands high, then pointed into the shadows of the aisle, leading back from where he stood. So dramatic was his gesture that the voices went abruptly still, and all heads turned to look. There was nothing there, nothing but darkness. Then Jair sung. The Wishsong, quick and strident, and a tall black figure wrapped in a cloak and cowl emerged from out of the nothingness of the air. The figure was Alanon. There was a sharp gasp from those assembled. Swords and long knives slipped from their sheaths, and men bounded from their seats to defend against a shade that had emerged from the dark. Within the cowl, a dark, lean face lifted to the light, eyes fixing on the men of the council. Jair's song faded, and the druid was gone. He had turned once more to Browick. The dwarf's eyes were wide. Now do you believe me? The Valeman asked quietly. You said you knew him. You said you fought with him at Arbelon. Was that the druid? Slowly Browick nodded. That was Alanon. Then you know that I have seen him, Jair said. All assembled turned back now to stare at the Valeman, uneasy and shaken by what had happened. Behind him, Jair heard Slanter chuckle, a low, nervous laugh. He caught a glimpse of Garrett Yax from the corner of his eye. The weapons master had a curious, almost surprised look on his face. "I have told you the truth," Jair said to Browick. "I must go into the deeper now and find Heaven's well. Al-Anon will be there, with my sister. Now tell me, will you help me or not?" Browick glanced at the other elders. "What say you?" "I believe what he says," one old man ventured quietly. "But it could yet be a trick," another said. "Could be the work of the Maud Wraith." Jair glanced quickly about. A few heads were nodding in agreement. In the smoky light of the oil lamp, suspicion and fear clouded many eyes. "The risk is too great, I think," yet another elder said. Browick rose. "We are pledged to give aid to any who seek the destruction of the Wraiths," he said, blue eyes quick and hard. "This Valeman has told us he is allied with others of the like mind and purpose. I believe him. I believe we should do what we can to aid him in his quest. I call for a vote. Elders, give your hands in upper support. Give your hands in support if you agree." Browick's hand lifted high. Half a dozen more from the council lifted with it. But the dissenters were not to be silenced so easily. "This is madness," one shouted. "Who will go with him? Are we to send men from the village? Browick, who is to go on this quest to which you have unwisely given your blessing?" "I call for volunteers if this is to be done." A scattering of voices muttered in support. Browick nodded. "So be it." He looked about the chamber silently, his eyes shifting from one face to the next, searching, waiting for someone to accept the challenge. "I will go." Jair looked around slowly. Garrett Yax had come forward a single step, grey eyes expressionless as he faced the council. "The King of the Silver River promised the Valeman that I would be his protector," he said softly. "Very well, the promise shall be kept." Browick nodded, then looked about the room once more. "Who else among you will go?" he called out. Elb Foraker pushed away from the wall, against which he was leaning, and walked over to stand with his friend. Again Browick looked out among those gathered. A moment later there was a stirring from among the men of Culhaven. A giant borderman rose to his feet, black hair and beard close cropped about his long, strangely gentle face. "I'll go," he rumbled, and came forward to stand with the others. Jair took a step back in spite of himself. The borderman was almost as big as Al-Anon. "Helt," Browick greeted him. "The men of Culhaven need not make this quest their own." The big man shrugged. "We fight the same enemy, Elder. The quest appeals to me, and I would go." Then suddenly Adana Lessadale came to his feet. "I would go as well, Elder." Browick frowned. "You are a prince of the elves, young Adane. You are here with your elven hunters to repay a debt your father feels he owes the time the dwarves stood with him at Abalon. Well and good, but you carry the price of a debt too far. Your father would not approve of this. Reconsider." The elven prince smiled. "There is nothing to reconsider, Browick. The debt owed in this matter is not to the dwarves, but to the Valeman and his father. 20 years ago, Will Omspit went with an elven chosen in search of a talisman that would destroy the demons who had broken free of the forbidding. He risked his life for my father and for my people. Now I have a chance to do the same for Will Omspit, to go with his son, to see to it that he finds the thing he quests for. I am as able as any man here, and I would go." Still Browick frowned. Garrett Yax glanced at Foraker. The dwarf merely shrugged. The weapons master looked over at the elven prince for a moment, as if measuring the depth of his commitment, or perhaps simply his chance of surviving, then slowly nodded. "Very well," Browick acquainted. "5, then." "6," Garrett Yax said quietly. "And even half-dozen for luck." Browick looked puzzled. "Who is the 6th? Garrett Yax turned slowly about and pointed to Slanter. "The gnome." What? Slanter's jaw dropped. You can't choose me." "I have already done so," the other replied. "You are the only one here who has been where we want to go. You know the way, gnome, and you are going to show it to us." "I'll show you nothing." Slanter was livid, his face contorted with rage. This boy, this devil, he put you up to this. Well, you have no power over me. I'll throw you all to the wolves if you try and make me go. Gary X came up against him, the terrible grey eyes as cold as winter. That would be most unfortunate for you, Gnome, for the wolves would reach you first. Take a moment and think it through. The assembly went deathly still. Weapons Master and Gnome faced each other without moving, eyes locked. In the eyes of the man in black, there was death. In the eyes of Slanter, hesitation. But the Gnome did not back away. He stood where he was, seething with anger, trapped in a snare of his own making. Slowly his gaze shifted to find Jair, and in that instant the bellman actually found himself feeling sorry for the Gnome. Slanter's nod was barely perceptible. I've no choice, it seems, he muttered. I'll take you. Gary X turned back once more to Browick. 6. The dwarf elder hesitated, then sighed in resignation. 6 it is, he declared softly. Fortune go with you.